Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kevin Hall. I have the honour and privilege of being the president at the University of Victoria. I wanted to start off by acknowledging we're here on the homelands of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and I pay my respects to the Lekwungen peoples, the Wasanich peoples, whose historic traditions continue to today. I've got a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. The event has an official photographer, so you've all got your little cameras. Put them in your pockets, put them on silent, and we'll share the photographs from this event online afterwards. And at this point in time, it's my pleasure to invite Esquimalt Chief Jerome Thomas and Councillor Gary Norman Sam, who is not quite here yet, on his way, to come up and start us off in a good way. So, Chief Thomas.
It's Rachel. Good day, everyone. I start off by introducing myself. My Indian name is Sisanuk. It was a name that was passed down from generation to generation as far back as I know. It was when we had our homeland and where the Parliament buildings are, before we were moved. My English name is Jerome Thomas. I'm the elected chief of the Esquimalt Nation. Honored that you guys asked me to be here to welcome you to our territories. So welcome everyone, and thank you for having me. And I'm sorry I missed your when you came into power.
Chief Thomas, we want to thank you. We know you've got an amazing agenda full of things to do, both for your nation, for the region, and the fact that you give time to UVic and give time to come here today is really appreciated by us. And I have a small handshake for you. I'm getting a thumbs up. So Councillor Gary Norman Sam has just arrived. He was held up in traffic. So as he comes in, I just again wanted to welcome Councillor Gary Norman Sam of the Songhees Nation, who is going to also start us off in a good way and also give us a welcome and a prayer today. I understand, Gary Norman, have you been told you can do in the prayer as well? All right, good, thank you.
Hechka, CM, Tikwam. Sorry I'm late. Just thanking you all for your patience before I offer up a prayer and a word from Songhees Nation. Masi, Hechka, Sodom Stay, Quinnes Nestaman, Say Tenants, 80 Sunny Spray, Sodom Stay, Nakaka, Men, Na Tiwiyeth, Na Haikun, Na Kaka na Tamoch, na Lekwungen, na Snaka Tamoch, and na Spekwan Tangoch. OCM, CM, the University of Victoria, na Hiwas and Swasiwas, the leaders who invited the Songhees Nation and Esquimalt Nations to be here today to partake in your event and take the small time away. And in the language, I offered up a prayer and acknowledgement to the sacred lands and to our wonderful leaders who rule the Songhees and Esquimalt nations today to a more productive and safe future, and nurturing relationships like this today. Offering up a gratitude of prayer for just being here today and sharing in the faith and religion and culture that an elder in residence here in the Shaker faith, May Sam always shares a prayer and a song. So Masi. No, ho, 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 ho. Oh, 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 oh. Masi Haichka Sodom Stay Hakamen Nakaka Ten Na Sotham Splay Quinance Masi, in your name, giving you offer in this prayer, in this short prayer, giving you thanks for the song. I'm thanking you for this time today once again. Masi Haichka Sodom Stay Quinemics Nest Mansi Tenants A Tisaner Spray Sodom Stay. Thank you all. I'm just sharing that song from the 1910 Shaker Faith that the southern islands of Vancouver Island follow and look to the Great Spirit. And, you know, we carry on those songs from our ancestors today. And just thanking you for this moment in prayer. And Osiam, on behalf of the Songhees Nation, on behalf of my chief and my community, I am Norman Gary Sam. Also welcome you to the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people, today known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and paying homage and honor to these sacred lands today, these lands of Snaka and Spehwang, the traditional territories of Lekwungen villages, and that these places could honor those memories today. I just wanted to pay homage and respect to those names. Haichka Siam, all my friends and relations, OCM. Haichka, Hela.
And Councillor Norman Gary Sam, thanks so much for rushing over here through traffic and cold weather, and we really appreciate, again, you taking time out of your really busy schedule to grace us with your presence today, and thank you for your words from the Songhees Nation, and have a handshake for you. So I'd like to really, again, welcome you all for joining us on this really important discussion on hope and determination, marking the 10th anniversary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions. Having Chief Thomas and Councillor Sam here today is really important for us. It represents the partnership that the University of Victoria has with the local nations. It's an extremely important partnership for this university and helps us move forward in our work we have to do in reconciliation. I want to also recognize today we are joined by Haywith Hupinuk, a hereditary chief from Hawaiian Nation, and a UVic faculty member, Tommy Happinuk. Tommy, are you somewhere? No. Okay. And we're very grateful also to have Kikita Kashuua, Mark Altio from the Ahousaht First Nation, and a survivor of the Alberni Indian Residential School. So thank you, Mark, for being here today. And we're also joined by many of our elders and residents. I think they're all sitting together, actually, in the row over here. So to Edie and May and Barb and Jerry and Wilbert, thanks for what you do for this university. Having you here interacting with all of our students, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, just makes us a much richer place. So thank you. So today's discussion is really a crucial one. It's one that we should have often. We should have it in our offices, with our friends, at our dining room table. Walking the path of truth, respect, and reconciliation is one of the most important journeys we can take as Canadians, and we have to take it together. I'd like to recognize right now the work of the late Senator Murray Sinclair as the Chief Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. His leadership was really integral in bringing forward the 94 calls to action. Senator Sinclair's vision for reconciliation addressed the past atrocities and aimed to build a future based on mutual respect and shared understanding. I'd also like to acknowledge the contributions of the commissioners who served alongside Senator Sinclair, the thousands of survivors who bravely shared their stories, their supportive families and communities, and the researchers, educators, and policymakers that are working hard to implement the calls to action today. The TRC reminds us that the path to reconciliation is not always easy. It requires difficult conversations. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about our shared history and its legacy. These conversations, though, are essential in building a better future together. At UVic, we feel that engaging openly and honestly with a willingness to listen and learn can create a solid foundation for reconciliation in Canada. And as we look forward to the future, we have to recognize that while there's a willingness to listen, we have to make a concerted effort to really understand what we're hearing, to make sure we formulate our plans before we can advance forward. In the wise words of Senator Sinclair, reconciliation is about forging and maintaining respectful relationships. There are no shortcuts. Today, we honor the work done and acknowledge the challenges ahead and reaffirm our commitment to the ongoing process of reconciliation. So now, I'm really pleased to introduce our esteemed guest, whose remarkable life has been dedicated to public service, advocacy for Indigenous rights, and building bridges throughout our society. Her Excellency's career is marked by advancing critical social, economic, and human rights issues. She was actively involved in the patriation of the Canadian Constitution, which formally enshrined Indigenous and treaty rights. Her Excellency's appointment as the 30th Governor-General of Canada marked the first time an Indigenous person assumed this role, a historic milestone for Canada. In 2016, the University of Victoria conferred upon Her Excellency an honorary Doctor of Laws, acknowledging her distinguished career and unwavering commitment to public service. This recognition also celebrated Her Excellency's significant contributions and exemplary dedication to improving the lives of others. I'd now like to invite Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, the Governor-General of Canada, to speak.
Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings to the elders, to Chief and Councillor. Thank you for being here. And I didn't expect to see snow in Victoria today. So I was going to enjoy the greenery, but I ended up seeing snow, but that's okay. It's still a beautiful place. First, I want to acknowledge the Likoan Songhi Esquimalt peoples on whose territory the university stands, and to the Waisenut peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. I am grateful for the opportunity to reflect on the legacy of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with all of you. My heartfelt thanks go to Ry Moran and the entire University of Victoria community for organizing this very meaningful discussion. I will always remember the day I told my story at the TRC. I did not expect to feel so emotional talking about my childhood in Nunavik, my education, and the children in my community who were sent to residential schools. At one point during this session, the late Senator Murray Sinclair came to me and comforted me with warmth and compassion, and I'll never forget that. We were living a historic moment. The TRC created the first national platform for residential school survivors and their communities to talk about their experiences publicly. When the TRC report was released 10 years ago, most Canadians learned about what happened for the first time. And I remember people being horrified saying, "I did not know." Years later, the findings of unmarked graves of children at former residential school sites moved people even more. I saw this in 2021 at the beginning of my mandate as Governor General when I visited the T-Kamloops, T-Swapan First Nations in Kamloops. The truth survivors had spoken about for decades both privately and publicly, were confirmed in images before our very eyes. I saw a nationwide show of support for Indigenous peoples and grieving families. Now, after all these years, and after the phenomenal work we've accomplished, it is no longer acceptable for anyone in Canada to claim, "I don't know." We are past the stage of mere awareness. Canadians are shifting from learning to action. The TRC's 94 calls to action speak to a variety of areas where reconciliation advancements are so needed, from child welfare to healthcare and education. And yes, there is still much work to be done on the calls to action. But this is only one part of reconciliation. Reconciliation is happening across the country. There has been groundbreaking work to renew the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. We are seeing more and more signs that the Canadian publics support reconciliation efforts. The symbol of the orange shirt and the meaning of "Every Child Matters" has become widespread, as well as the local initiatives around National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. We have seen rallying events like Vancouver's Walk for Reconciliation. I recently presented a meritorious service decoration for Karen Joseph, the founder of Reconciliation Canada, for promoting meaningful dialogue through this initiative. We are also seeing more research initiatives, like Thinking Historically for Canada's Future, supported by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, which focuses on how history is taught within the public education system. This is a very important issue for me personally, coming from the Inuit culture. We were never taught any of our culture or even our language when we went to school. And now that we have this opportunity to create the history of the country in an inclusive way is such an important aspect of creating a nation that is inclusive of the nations that live here. Economic reconciliation has also become an area of growing interest at various conferences across the country. In fact, I was just talking to someone that's Indigenous that is going to be attending the conference in Toronto that the Prime Minister has just announced between Canada and the United States. We all know that progress is slow and can be quite slow. But when you look back, like I've been in this job now for 4.5 years, when I started, it was at the point where Canadians were experiencing the visual aspects of what residential school was. But now, as I travel across the country, there are many more people that are open and willing to talk about issues that separate us. And as the President said, these are hard conversations to have, but they are really necessary to be able to build a society that will allow Indigenous people to be themselves, their culture, their languages. And we are going through some difficult periods with language. There's a loss of language in all the regions across the country. Even in my community up north in the Arctic, we see the changes taking place in terms of our languages, and that's so important. Some communities, they have like 1 or 2 elders left that speak the language. So that, you know, it is a very urgent, important issue that the country faces. TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, sparked an awakening, I think, that is reshaping our nation. and we must really continue to move forward. La Commission de vérité et réconciliation provoquait un éveil qui transforme notre nation. Continuons à avancer. In recent years, I had the privilege of witnessing the historic apology of His Holiness Pope Francis for the harmful actions of members of the Catholic Church in Canada's residential school system. I also participated in a memorable meeting between the leaders of Canada's national Indigenous leaders organizations and His Majesty King Charles III, just a couple of days before his coronation. It was a historic day that marked the beginning of a renewed relationship with the Crown through reconciliation. And last fall, I was deeply honored to host some of the last survivors of the residential school system at Rideau Hall in Ottawa. There were a lot of tears that night, including my tears. When Kimberly Murray, the independent special interlocutor, released her report and had just completed her sacred work of recovering the missing children, which has helped so many people in their healing journeys. I am hopeful that her landmark report will serve as a valuable roadmap for our future efforts. We have seen important milestones in recent years, and today my message to you, to all levels of government, and to all Canadians is simple. As difficult and long as this road is to reconciliation, it is having a positive impact, and we should never give up. I have a word in my language that I often use at work or when I'm traveling in other countries, and it's an old word in my language, and it means to never give up. And the word is ayuinata. And just a very short story. When President Zelensky was in Ottawa about a year and a half ago, I had the opportunity to meet with him. And as I was looking at him, I could this word kept coming up, ayuinata, when I was looking at him. And I finally said to him, I said, can I teach you one word in my language? Because I said, it's you that I'm that I'm talking about. And he even wrote down the word ayuinata. And then when he gave his speech in the Parliament that night, when he was ending his speech, he said, ayuinata. So that was really amazing. So governments, institutions, and every Canadian must renew their commitment to reconciliation in every field and through diverse efforts. Les gouvernements, les institutions et tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes doivent renouveler leur engagement à poursuivre la réconciliation dans tous les domaines et par diverse efforts. Reconciliation means different things to different people, and so much the better, because every action counts. We must encourage non-Indigenous people to act and help us consider and counter residential school denialism. As the late Senator Sinclair insisted, it all starts with education, and I want to salute the innovative work that the University of Victoria is doing in that regard. Your institution has become a hub for knowledge, exchange on Indigenous resurgence and decolonization, and you now offer the world's first master's degree in advancing reconciliation. Congratulations and thank you. Other institutions across the country are following suit. I visited the First Nations University of Canada in Regina, Saskatchewan, the first Nations-controlled university in Canada. I met Innu youth participating in a marine science expedition in Labrador's Mealy Mountains National Park Reserve as part of the Indigenous Guardians program. And I was proud to learn that Inuit Nunangat, which is the Arctic region, Inuit homeland is called Inuit Nunangat in our language, that I recently learned that the Inuit Nunangat University will be launched in the north in a few years, and this is very exciting for us. It will be the first Canadian university grounded in Inuit culture and language. I feel a strong sense of hope when I see young Indigenous people today forging their future careers while proudly embracing their identity. It is really a huge step forward. This 10-year anniversary does not mark an end to our work, but the beginning of a new chapter. Let's keep creating brave spaces in our institutions for conversations like those we are having today. Spaces where people can think critically about what they were taught and unlearn and relearn. And most importantly, let's continue engaging students and youth in all our efforts. Let's consider the unique insights they bring to these important discussions. They will be the ones to carry reconciliation into the future. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing your views. Nakomik ilunasi, tamani ge mehuvesepunga.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for sharing those reflections with us. We're all a lot richer for that. And thank you for reminding us that every action matters and never give up and always have hope. I think those are really important messages for all of us. At this time, we're now going to move to the panel discussion, and I would like to invite Ry Moran and his panel to come and take their chairs. Ry's going to introduce the panel members. But then we were stuck with nobody's going to introduce Ry. He can't introduce himself, although he did want to. So I'm going to do that. Ry did ask to have rose petals on the stage. He can tell you about that a little later on, but we didn't get the rose petals. But everybody at UVic knows Ry very well. He's devoted his life to advancing truth, respect, and reconciliation. He served with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, gathering nearly 7,000 hours of video and audio recorded statements from residential school survivors and millions of pages of archival records. He's also served as the founding director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation at the University of Manitoba, guiding its creation and contributing to major national initiatives. These include the National Student Memorial Register, the designation of multiple residential schools as National Historic Sites, the development of the Indigenous Peoples Atlas of Canada, and major educational broadcasts reaching over 3 million Canadians. We're really proud to call Ry a UVic alumnus and fortunate to have him here as our Associate University Librarian Reconciliation, where he builds relationships and introduces Indigenous approaches and knowledge into the library's work and across our campus. So please welcome the panel and Ry Moran.
Well, thank you, President Hall, for that lovely introduction. And most importantly, thank you to Your Excellencies, and especially Your Excellency, for these wonderful opening remarks and for traveling all this way to visit with us today. It's very humbling to be able to share in this conversation in your presence, simply due to the incredible work that you've done over decades now, advancing the rights of your peoples and also advancing reconciliation broadly across this country and beyond. So I really thank you from the bottom of my heart from all that you've done, because it really matters, and it matters to a lot of people and to future generations. It's my great pleasure to spend some time with all of you here today. As you heard, my name's Ry. I'm the Associate University Librarian Reconciliation, and I'm joined by three exceptional people, all who have had a really important role either directly in the Commission's work, contributing to the Commission's work, or forging the path forward that we collectively walk upon together as Canadians. So starting at the end, we've got Dr. Andrea Walsh, a member of our campus community here and honorary witness of the TRC, Carey Newman, Impact Chair, artist, opera singer extraordinaire, as a matter of fact, too. So if you ever get a chance to hear him sing, do that. And Dr. John Burrows, without a doubt, unquestioningly one of the top Indigenous and top legal scholars in the entire world. So what a treat sharing the stage with all of these fine folks. Just very briefly for context, we've talked about this being the 10 years out from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action being released to all of us as Canadians, giving us this incredible opportunity to start digging into the transformative hard work that needs to happen. I was reflecting, just sitting in the front row here, that probably about 15 years ago, right at this point, I was literally probably on a plane flying from Victoria out to Winnipeg to have some of the very first meetings that we were holding as a commission as we were starting to build our team. And I was thinking about that because, at that point, we didn't have the benefit of the truth of survivors in our country at the time. We had not recorded any statements. We had not collected any documents. And we were at the outset of shattering the silence. And it is only thanks to the courage, determination, foresight of residential school survivors, some of whom are in the audience, being so brave, being so strong to stand up oftentimes in front of audiences of thousands and tell folks what had happened, that we've had this opportunity today to reflect on the change that's still in front of us. So we're going to work along the panel here, and we're going to start with Andrea. Now, we said Andrea is an honorary witness of the TRC. That's a very significant distinction, actually, and reflects a lot of your work that you did with survivors here on Vancouver Island. So your induction was a powerful moment in the Commission's history. It was due to the groundbreaking work you did repatriating children's art from residential schools on the island here. What role does repatriation and bearing witness to that repatriation have in your own life and in the work of the Commission, more broadly across Canada here?
Thank you, Ry, and thank you for this kind invitation to speak. I think when you asked me to reflect on what it's meant for me to be an honorary witness, I thought, I'm not there yet. And I think how 13 years ago I was inducted to be an honorary witness, and I continue to grow into that role. And I want to acknowledge that growth has come through the care and education I've received from survivors, particularly of the Alberni Residential School. And I want to acknowledge Ki Kita Kashua Markatlio Ahozet Nation, who's with me today in the House. And I want to acknowledge Hatwis Soctus, Chief Jeffrey Cook of the Hluayet First Nation, who's with us online. These two gentlemen are survivors of the residential school in Alberni, and we've worked together for over 10 years to return to survivors of the Alberni school childhood paintings that were created in the mid-1960s and gifted to the University of Victoria in 2008. And through our collective efforts, survivors, families, students, faculty, staff, we've been able to repatriate those paintings. And through the work we've done with the support of the university, we're here today. So you asked me to think about what repatriation has meant to me as an honorary witness. And the first thing I thought of were the words that Hatwith Soctus Jeffrey Cook said at the 2012 TRC regional event here in Victoria. And after seeing his childhood painting, I'll just say that there's some banners out in the foyer that tell the story of this incredible group of people. And I really invite you to go take a look at the art and read about us. Hatwith Soctus said, "This is the only thing I have as a 9-year-old, as a 10-year-old, and my friends as 11-year-olds. that where other families and other cultures, they save their mementos for their children of their childhood. And he said, this is the only thing I have. And I think when I think about what it meant, that was the start of my journey to learn through the survivors and what they were beginning to share, that these pieces of paper were not just that, they were sacred treasures. And they were the material connections between generations. And what we, as you were in the moment of statement gathering, these were, as they were presented to people who attended the Victoria Regional event, they were visual testimony of truth. And I began to see the paintings in that way. But I've also witnessed survivors over the last 10 years in incredible creative moments. Through art exhibitions, they've shared their paintings, education initiatives. We've worked with small district museums. We've been invited by church groups, high schools, universities, right through to we have this story permanently installed in Canada Hall at the Museum of History. But I've also thought about what it's meant to do this work as I've had private moments shared with me that don't make those public stages. And so I've seen the power of returning those paintings as starting difficult conversations within families. I've seen the paintings strengthen lineages, bringing people together. I've seen the paintings contribute to governance. And I've also seen the paintings give people opportunities to tell love stories. So there's high school crushes that were admitted along the way, which were great to hear about. But, you know, ultimately the survivors, I've been able to be a part of what they vision and sharing their truth through their childhood art. I'm very proud for them and happy for them because their story is recorded in the final report of the TRC in Volume 6 on reconciliation. But when I speak to people as an honorary witness, when I speak to fellow Canadians, I remind us that when we witness the return of these paintings, that they were never meant to be, they were never created for these conversations, and that they were always and remain the work of creative relatives, of grandmas and grandpas, of mothers and fathers, uncles and aunties, cousins, brothers and sisters, and that they remain these visual connections to home and family. And so I guess as I would close with saying, as an honorary witness, I think a lot about time moving on, and particularly I joke with, Mark jokes with me that my hair was a different color when we started, but we're all moving on. The work moves on, but I worry that the country moves on. And how do we address that? And particularly when the physical evidence of residential and day schools is disappearing from the landscape, when the buildings are coming down and they're no longer in front of us as part of our consciousness as Canadians. And sometimes those buildings are coming down because nations never asked for those buildings, and they're taking them down because they need to heal and they need to take control of what their communities look like and how they live within them. But it's no small wonder, I think, that the creativity of children seen in these fragile works of art, these beautiful paintings are leading us into these kinds of conversations and into action. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. You know, the role of bearing witness that you speak to, the public moments, the private moments, the things that you carry with you. Carey, these are things that you too carry, not just through being witness to TRC events, but also as the creator of the Witness Blanket, a monumental work that has continued to educate and inspire Canadians from coast to coast to coast. what role does art play? What role has art played for you and your family? What role does it play in the country? What role does it play moving forward as we think about this?
I think in my family, art has been passed down through generations. And I didn't really think much about what that means in a collective or a communal sense early on in my career. And it wasn't until I started doing more community engaged projects when I started to understand the power that it has in a few different ways. And so in thinking about the way that art can participate in truth, in the formation of truth, or the holding on to of truth, and in the process of reconciliation, I think about it maybe in three levels. Like on a personal level, how it reaches individuals; on a communal level, how it can bring people together; and then on a structural level, for how it can impact and affect bigger things in subtle ways. And so, like, thinking about on a personal level, watching people interact with the witness blanket over the years, I've seen how they focus in on one of the objects. There's 880 plus objects that we gathered from across the country. And in focusing in on that, they usually do that because it connects with their own memories, their own experiences. And in that moment, they make a connection, right? And once we make a personal connection to something, it becomes important. And once it becomes important, then we're willing maybe to participate, to be uncomfortable, to roll up our sleeves and do some of the work that needs to be done around the process of reconciliation. And I've seen that time and time again, where multiple associated projects, places where the blanket has gone, documentary film, all of the things that have come about that are related to that project have come from people who saw something on it and connected to it and then made the suggestion. Have you ever thought of making a virtual reality witness blanket? Have you ever thought of taking it on tour? Those sorts of things. And so I see how it does that work. And it's not the artwork, it's the objects, it's the material truth of those pieces that came from these places that carry those stories. On a communal level, we watched, we witnessed, we met people, we traveled across the country, and we slowly built trust. We slowly helped people to understand what a witness blanket might look like back when we didn't have any contributions from anybody. And you could see how, as each contribution came in and we were able to share that with others, how it would open up ideas in people. And even people who weren't meeting each other in person were taking cues from others who had made contributions to the blanket. And you also see that in the community of care that develops around the blanket. And maybe the last thing is, throughout that process, I was changing my relationship with my material. I used to think of artwork as like I would get a log or a piece of silver and I would shape it into the thing that I wanted it to be. But I didn't think too much about the material itself. Once I started getting contributions from people and I knew that they were mementos, that they had memories attached to them, it elevated them in my in my, I guess, my responsibility to them. And so going through that, when it came time to decide where the witness blanket would go, and it's now at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and we installed it there permanently in late September, it was placed there through something that we developed called a stewardship agreement. And that stewardship agreement brings forward Kwakwaka'wakw and Coast Salish legal orders and worldviews. And so rather than focusing on rights, the agreement focuses on responsibility. And rather than focusing on ownership, it again focuses on stewardship and how we can come together to collectively care for this work and the stories that are associated with it. And so we enacted like a Western legal contract, but we changed the parameters to bring in Indigenous worldviews. And so that's, to me, an example of art affecting people on a personal level, on a communal level, and then once we feel that connection, it changes our relationship with each other, with material, and it leads to structural change.
We talk about the relationships that are at stake in Canada, and we heard the President talk about Murray's words that are so eloquently expressed in the TRC's report about the establishment and maintenance of mutually respectful relationships. John, your work over decades now has been creating space for respect for Indigenous laws and Indigenous legal orders, including the groundbreaking work here at the University of Victoria in the creation of our new National Centre, which is the first of its kind in the world. The Commission spoke about the critical importance of Indigenous laws, Indigenous legal orders in this overall process of healing and reconciliation that we're going through. Looking back, thinking about the present, looking forward, what's on your mind as we're at this critical juncture now in our country's history?
I really appreciated the calls to action, which were calls to all sectors of society, not just to legislatures or courts or the executive. And this is to say that law is something that people do. It's an embodied activity. It's something that we live. And so what I've seen over the last decade as a result of the calls to action are people living our laws. So, for example, we have a colleague, Sarah Morales, who's Hulkaminam, and she's been working with her community to implement the child welfare laws that are bringing forward Hulkaminam law. And so her and her community, it's an example of that embodied nature of law being something you do. It's something that Sarah's doing, and it's something that the Hulkaminam community are doing. And I think about our other colleagues who've done this across the country, former students that are working in the Peguis First Nation, Earl Stevenson, drawing out Anishinaabe law to take care of the children so that they don't have to go through what not only happened in a residential school, but what we've seen through all sorts of scoop people into the child welfare system through the years. And then I think about Doug White, one of our former students who is working with the Premier and embodying the law again. He was served in his community as a chief, but he's constantly bringing forward the importance of our laws in the law societies reforms, in the legislature through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so the notion that you live law through people, it's not just an abstraction that's in case books or legislation, is really illustrated by their lives. I think about my colleague Val Napoleon, who really was the heart and soul of bringing this new building to pass on campus. That call to action was for Indigenous law institutes. And we had over 600 meetings to bring this to pass, to talk with all levels of government and the profession and communities. And so there she is and was living law, helping people to understand the importance of having a gathering space for education in relationship to law. And then we have another student, Carly Fox from the Blood Tribe, who is constantly arguing in the Supreme Court of Canada. And she's bringing forward our laws. So whatever dispute, it's a treaty dispute, it's an Aboriginal title dispute, it's an Aboriginal rights dispute, she, with her clients, brings forth what their laws are in relationship to those issues. So when I think about what's happening here, I see people living law in ways that allows us to see law as Canadians as something we do, not something that's just done to us. That's a very important message at this time and this age, that we are the agents of law and that we have the ability and the power to shape law through our participation, as opposed to the unilateral executive orders down. It's a really important moment that Indigenous law presents another view of how we practice together.
You talk about embodying law. I think so much about the concept of embodying reconciliation too when you say that, and in so doing, embodying a sense of justice and embodying a pursuit of justice, recognizing, to borrow the old words, that, we can be the change that we want to see in the world, that reconciliation is, yes, a destination down the road, but it's also very much how we hold ourselves, how we conduct ourselves in the minute by minute, day to day, week by week, month to month basis, in our communities, in our families, in our regions. We talked earlier too about this being the 10-year anniversary, this year being the 10-year anniversary. Of course, the calls to action were released in June. Some of them have been done. A lot of them haven't. A theme of this particular panel is hope, and it is determination. Things, I think it's fair to say, don't feel sometimes entirely hopeful in the world right now. We're having some pretty complex conversations nationally and internationally. But hope is a very fierce feeling, and it's something that I've certainly seen time and time again in the courage of survivors. So I want to ask the panelists, what gives you hope? What does this concept of determination and hope mean to you at this particular moment? And what do you want to share with folks around those concepts?
For me, when I think of hope, I intertwine hope and inspiration. I think that I have a hard time separating the two, and I would say there's kind of three things that I would want to share. And one is that I am hopeful and I'm inspired by people, and first and foremost, the survivors and their vision for our work together. I'm inspired and I'm hopeful for the way in which, when we as a group, and there's probably like a core group of 20 or 30 of us who do this work together, when we go out into public settings, the way in which the public has engaged what we're saying. And I'm inspired by the way they invite others to join us. And here at UVic, I am just so terribly inspired by my students who come to the classes. Like Mark and I are in classes a lot here. We go to high schools. I'm so inspired by the young people who say, I'm ready to do this work. And I have great hope for them. Secondly, I take a lot of joy in being a faculty member at UVic. I did my undergrad here. My dad was a professor here. I feel very committed to this place. And so I want to say that I continue to have hope that the work and generosity of survivors is understood by those in leadership positions, including institutions like ours. And that when we speak of strategic planning, research, and innovation, we strengthen the connections between the calls to action and resourcing high-level initiatives for structural change. And the final thing I would say is that in our work, we say the paintings too have survived. And as a witness, I continue to be inspired by the children's brushstrokes and the colors that those marks carry. And I continue to hold hope that the marks of children will guide us. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. Carey.
I was thinking about where we derive hope and the importance having hope, especially in the face of things that feel existential or overwhelming, and the role that art plays that in that, but also the role that children play in providing hope and inspiration. Thinking about how the work that Andrea does with survivors and those paintings continue conversations decades later, to the point where one of them became part of the witness blanket. If you see it, there's a purple painting above the door, and that is one of the paintings that comes from the collection, and was painted by the late great Art Thompson when before he became a famous artist. And I think about like those moments, what that meant to those children in residential schools. And then I fast forward to a project that I did at Oaklands Elementary, where I was carving a pole with children. And we started talking about it, calling it hearts and hands, hands-on, hearts-on education. And we were connecting the things they were learning in classrooms to the technical and cultural process of carving a totem, and watching those minds sort of understand justice, understand these things at a fundamental level of fairness. And then celebrating with them as we unveiled the pole that they were involved in making and carving and picking the animals for, by watching them plan the ceremony and watching them learn and sing the songs. Now, that was my daughter's school. So I derive a lot of my hope from my own child, but I got to float on top of the excitement of all of the kids at Oaklands Elementary. Then fast forward again. I think that was about 4 years ago that we completed that project. And they have to do some seismic upgrades at the school. So they have to move the pole, and I get a call from somebody at the district saying that, inviting me to come to the day when they were going to move the pole. And when I arrived, I got to witness students working with an elder to gather cedar boughs so that they could brush down the pole. I got to witness a new generation of little children learning songs and singing songs while they lifted the pole and put it into storage. And it just struck me how that wouldn't have happened pre-TRC. That process that took place, where everybody from facilities to administration to teachers to children came together around the care of that pole. And yeah, seeing those kids sing, seeing the ownership they still feel, or the connection they still feel, that's really hopeful for me.
That's awesome, Carey. Thank you. John?
My mother ran away from home at age 14 as her siblings were being taken to residential school. And so it was a hard time to get through as a young person. And she always felt guilty that her siblings went to school and she wasn't there to protect them. And so I saw her carry that burden through many years, but she really focused on love in her life. And now she's 88 and she is losing her memory, and at a recent birthday. And when she sang to me, she wasn't really present for much of the conversation, but she said at one point, I want to sing to him. And so she sang a song of love. And to know that you could go through that disjointing, just jarring experience and still carry love in your life is a reason for great hope. And then I see my daughter now who's teaching at Queen's Law School, and she teaches in the area that I do, does land-based education. There's a new mandatory course at Queen's to all the law students teaching about Indigenous peoples law, as well as Canadian law relating to Aboriginal peoples. And I see how she is writing about Anishinaabe law in the more than human world, and the beauty that comes from the plants, the animals, the fish, the surrounding life and how that guides our laws is so inspiring. And then I now have a 6-year-old grandchild, a 4-year-old grandchild, and a 1-year-old grandchild, and Wasea, Kika, and Noka, and their joy, and not having to worry like 6-year-olds did, 60 years ago, that they would be taken. And just to watch her dance and sing and be happy and be secure in her home, that's the greatest hope.
I want to sincerely thank each and every one of you, not only for participating in this discussion today, but of course for all of the work that you do on behalf of all of us in this fierce work of truth and reconciliation and this fierce work of healing. Hope is a very powerful sentiment, and when I have the privilege of sitting in spaces like this, I too remain very, very hopeful, and I remain very, very hopeful because of the very fact that this is actually happening. I never personally take for granted the fact that you all have chosen to be here and that we all worked together to make this happen. We all had somewhere else to be, and lots of busy pressures pulling us in many, many different directions in life. But we did choose to opt into this conversation. And the more we opt into it, the more we choose positively, the more we choose to talk about this, the more we choose to keep it fresh and at the front of our minds. We keep talking about the 10-year anniversary. We keep talking about the calls to action, keep talking about what it is that survivors offered to each and every one of us and offered the country as a whole. That will serve us in very, very good stead. It'll keep us walking on this path of reconciliation. And I'll tell you with absolute certainty, when we started out at the TRC, we had a lot of conversations around the table about what this day would look like, what would happen at the end. Would this be another report that would fall, on government desks and be shelved? Would Canadians rally to the cry? Would Canada finally listen? And I do believe that many, many Canadians have, and that includes each and every one of you, and all of the people also that have tuned in online from across the country. And hello to you all. Thank you very much for being here. So from sincerely, from at least the bottom of my heart and from my family to yours, thank you for being here today. Your Excellencies, thank you for making the long trip out here. It's a huge privilege and honor to have you here and to celebrate your own installment as well. I think part of what is also incredible about this time that we're living in is we get to see so many firsts and so many remarkable firsts, and we get to have firsts right in our midst. The first Indigenous Governor General of Canada. This is truly a history-breaking moment, and we're very, very thankful for all that you do on behalf of all of us. I think that pretty well brings us to the end. Chief, Councillor, all the elders, the survivors that are in the room, thank you very, very much. Of course, the President for making this all happen. And especially to the team behind the scenes, both at Rideau Hall, but especially here at the University of Victoria that have made this happen as well. It takes a lot of work to throw an event together, and it's such a treat to work with the team here at the University of Victoria. Thank you very much, Miigwech, merci. I wish you the very, very best. And my parting words, I'm going to echo my dear friend Eugene. Go home, tell somebody you love them, give somebody a hug, pick up the phone and call that friend that you haven't called for a while. Take a look at the land around us, derive that good feeling that comes from seeing ourselves in the land and cherishing this incredible gift of life that we have. Share that love with others. That'll serve us in very good stead as well. So I wish you the very, very best. Safe travels home wherever you're going. And thank you very much for coming today and being part of this conversation. Now, I think Her Excellency is going to visit with some students next door, so you can kind of make your way over that way. The rest of you, you're more than welcome to sort of mix and mingle and drink water. And we rolled out all the stops here for you, so.